Africa has got to be free.
Greetings everyone, I hope you are fine. I hope you are doing well. I'm Xolani Moloi and I live in South Africa, and I would like to appreciate you for taking this moment or your precious time to watch this video. And if you want to support this channel, I will appreciate if you can just hit the subscribe button, that like button, like never before. In this video, I just want us to listen. I know sometimes right now, these days, we are used to listening to a short-term content. In other words, we are lazy to listen for about like maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But I'm begging you to listen to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma talking about emancipation of mental slavery.
We must decolonize our minds and believe in ourselves. Because if your mind is decolonized, they don't need to come physically. You are already in prison. So let's decolonize our minds.
The problem is in the mind. In other words, when you see people behaving in a certain way, making certain decisions, sometimes the problem is not those decisions, or is not them making those decisions, is not them behaving like that, but the problem is in the mind. Why? Because 600 years, 400 years, 500 years is very, very, very long. For an example, if my grandfather, who lived about 400 years ago, was manipulated to the core, and my other grandfather was also manipulated to the core, until my grandfather and my father, then it means it's most likely that I will also be manipulated to the core as well. That is why you will always hear people talking about the colonizer. That is why right now in South Africa, there are many people who are like, we have to go back to the former regime because the former regime was better. But if you go to the root of the problem, you will discover that the problem is in the mind, how we process things. So the moment we encounter a problem, we feel like the former regime was better. Why? Because we don't have the tools to deal with that particular problem by ourselves, or to come up with the resources, to come up with the tools, to come up with the intelligence to deal with that particular problem. So at the end of the day, we end up leaning upon the colonizer. Why? Because all these years, 400 years, 500 years, 600 years, the colonizer has been working on a plan of making sure that it's not about torturing the body, but it's about torturing the mind. So that is why if I come across someone who is being manipulated to the core, even if I can come with a constructive idea, a very powerful idea, but because I look like him and he's manipulated, he won't consider me. But if a person from a different race can come with the very same idea, then that person will approve that particular idea. This is what is happening. If you like write proposals to our mayors, to our presidents, because you look like them, they don't consider your proposal. And that is why they always lean upon the colonizers, because they've been manipulated to the core. In other words, manipulation or colonization doesn't care about the lifestyle or your current lifestyle. It doesn't care about whether you are rich or you are poor or you are a billionaire or you are a president. In other words, colonization doesn't care about that because it's in the mind.
And decolonizing our minds means taking charge of our economies. Why aren't we say Africa is rich in all this. The president was mentioning all the things we are rich in. The 60% of available arable land globally is on this continent, but this continent imports food. We have sunshine more than 300 days a year. We have water. We have a big population, more than 1.4 billion. Why can't we feed ourselves? Who will respect us if we can't feed ourselves?
You will never be respected because the problem is in the mind. In other words, if you want to be respected, you need to first fix your mind, how you think. In other words, if you don't respect your roots, if you don't honor where you come from, if you don't honor the people who came before you, who fought for the struggle, no one will respect you. The reason most of these politicians are not respected is because they always want to align with the colonizer. They don't care about the sacrifices of those people who fought for freedom. In other words, if you are not loyal to someone who did something for you, then it means no one will respect you. No one will trust you. In other words, for an example, if you despise or if you turn against the people who helped you in life when you were down, nobody will respect you, especially people who know about the time when you were down. So the problem that we have right now is that the big problem is in the mind, is in our minds. So that is why we always think about the colonizer coming to rescue us. When we come across a difficult problem or any problem, we want to consult the colonizer.
Thomas Sankara said, who feeds you controls you.
Most definitely, the one who feeds you will control you. So that is why they will always tell you that we will take medication away from South Africa. We will do this in this country. It's because they feed you.
So we must grow our food. We must process our natural resources. Some people boast of importing furniture. They boast, my furniture is imported from there. Why?
It's in the mind. It's in the mind again. This is very important. It's very correct. Why? Because you can see sometimes people will brag about the clothes they wear. They'll brag about their cars, that this is a German car. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Others will brag about their furniture, their watches, that this was imported from Dubai, and etc. So, in other words, that's a sign of manipulation. So that is why the moment you spend some time with people, that's when you will realize how manipulated they are. That is why manipulation doesn't care about your gender, doesn't care about your finances, doesn't care about... So most of these people whom you think they are powerful business people, entrepreneurs, and etc., majority of them, including the politicians and the pastors, these people have been manipulated to the core. The problem is in the mind.
We have so much wood. Why do you import furniture? We have people, we have wood. There's no need. We grow cotton. Only 90% of our cotton is exported raw. Why? But we import fabric. And I'm glad Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are starting to make chocolate, because we sell cocoa beans, we get 8 billion around there. but the chocolate industry is more than 100 billion.
Did you just hear that? In other words, it's important, as Bob Marley said, that we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. If we produce raw material, in other words, we have to process those raw materials in our continent, in the continent of Africa. Why? Because if we export, if we keep on exporting, then those people will make more money.
So let's take charge of our economies. Let's beneficiate our minerals. Why are we sending these minerals raw? Sending minerals raw is exploiting jobs, high-paying jobs. We remain with the mining jobs, but the high-paying jobs are exported to where the minerals will be beneficiated. And exporting something raw, we are exporting revenue, because by the time it comes back to you as finished goods, it's probably 10 times or more expensive.
That is why many Africans are on the internet applying to go and work in Europe, in Germany, UK, China, Russia, America, and etc. and etc. You have to ask yourself why. The problem is in the mind when it comes to our leadership. Sometimes it's not just because they are puppets. Yes, they are puppets. But the reason they are even willing to become puppets is because the problem is in the mind. Because if you look at the puppet, how the puppet thinks, you sometimes you will even feel sorry for the puppet, because the reason he or she became the puppet is because of the mind. It's important to decolonize the colonizer out of our minds. In other words, Africa cannot be rich when it comes to minerals, but we are not rich when it comes to processing our minerals, when it comes to understanding how our minerals work, when it comes to discovery, when it comes to job creation, when it comes to all these things. My people perish because of the lack of knowledge.
So let's wake up. We have everything that everyone who has developed used to develop. The only thing is, must decolonize our minds and not think. You know, I lived in Addis, as you know, and one thing I learned from Addis, maybe it's because they were never colonized, is that they believe in themselves. You know, when they were building the Renaissance Dam that is now giving them the electricity, no investor came to invest. If it was some of us, we would still be waiting for the investors. But they didn't wait. They said, okay, we'll go ahead. The government did not have all the money to build that dam. But what they did, the diaspora contributed, but the citizens, everyone who had an Ethiopian number, and I'm one of them, I had an Ethiopian number for 4.5 years when I was there. You received an SMS every day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. And when you respond to that SMS, you donate $1 to that dam. Right? The citizens built that dam. They donated every day, and the dam is done now.
What does this mean? It means sometimes it's not even necessary to rely on the external investors. We can become our own investment. In other words, if someone is doing right, learn from those people. And there were countries who were against Ethiopia building that dam. In other words, they were like, Ethiopia was now disturbing them, and they would no longer get enough water from the Nile River, and etc. and etc. Why? Because of colonialism, because of colonial mindsets. But here is the thing. They've completed building that dam, and they are enjoying their investment. What does this mean? It means if we don't have an external investor, we can become our own investment. We can come up with various strategies as the individuals, as the community, or as the nation. But here is the thing. There are many things that have been done in our mind. The problem is in the mind, because we think the constitution cannot change. We think certain things cannot change. Why? Because the problem is in the mind.
Because they believed in themselves. Their minds were decolonized. But many of us would still be waiting for the investors to come. We wouldn't be having the electricity they are having because we are still waiting for the investors.
As I come to the end of this video, I just want to say Mrs. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was very spot on, very correct on this video. We have the problems that we can solve. And, but we want the approval from the colonizer. The colonizer cannot approve something that will disturb his interests. This is our problem. When it comes to, they've created all these things, copyrights and all these things, so that they can be protected. In order for you to produce something, in order for you to evolve something, you have to consult them. This is the problem. The problem is in our minds. We don't invest in our people. We don't invest in our knowledge. Look at Zimbabwe. There was this guy who came with an idea, not just an idea, but he manufactured a car that is not using electricity, that is not using all these different kinds of energies. But what are they doing right now? They are quiet. Why? They need an approval from the colonizer. And the colonizer will never approve such a thing. Why? Because you have to cry. You have to complain all the time, because one of the objectives of the colonizer is to create problems. Thank you very much for taking your precious time to watch this video. If you want to support this channel, hit the subscribe button, that like button, like never before.